dust devils danced outside the swinging doors of the Golden Nugget Saloon. But inside, Maggie kept everything spotless. Not a speck of dirt dared linger on her polished bar, reflecting the warm glow of the lantern light. Maggie wasn't just a saloon owner. She was the heart of dusty Redemption Gulch. Folks came to her for a strong drink, a friendly ear, and maybe a bit of advice, all served with a smile as bright as the desert sun. Her son, Billy, was her pride and joy. Just 15, he was already taller than her, with a shock of sandy hair and a grin that could charm a rattlesnake. He helped her around the saloon, bussing tables and running errands, but his real passion was whittling. He could turn a simple piece of wood into a beautiful bird or a tiny horse with amazing detail. He dreamed of becoming a proper wood carver, maybe even opening his own shop one day. Maggie and Billy were as close as two peas in a pod. They shared secrets, laughed at silly jokes, and looked out for each other in the rough and tumble world of the Wild West. Every evening, after the last customer left, they would sit together on the porch, watching the stars twinkle above the dark silhouette of the mountains. Billy would tell her about his daydreams, and Maggie would listen, her heart swelling with love and hope for his future. Redemption Gulch was a hard place, full of hard people, but Maggie had carved out a good life for herself and Billy. She knew everyone in town, from the blacksmith to the banker, and she treated them all with respect, even if they didn't always deserve it. She believed in fairness and honesty, and she tried to instill those values in Billy. But darkness was brewing in Redemption Gulch, a darkness that would shatter their peaceful existence forever. The darkness arrived in the form of a stagecoach robbery. A wealthy businessman, Mr. Abernathy, was passing through Redemption Gulch, carrying a large sum of money to invest in the local mine. The stage was ambushed just outside of town, and Abernathy's money was stolen. Sheriff Brody, a burly man with a cruel glint in his eyes, immediately launched an investigation, but it was more of a witch hunt. He was known for his quick judgments and his willingness to bend the law to suit his own purposes. He needed a scapegoat, and unfortunately, Billy fit the bill. Someone claimed to have seen a young man matching Billy's description near the scene of the robbery. It was a flimsy accusation, based on nothing more than prejudice and whispers. But Sheriff Brody seized upon it, eager to impress Mr. Abernathy and the influential mine owners who supported him. He arrested Billy, despite Maggie's frantic protests. She pleaded with the sheriff, arguing that Billy was innocent, that he was home with her all evening. But Brody wouldn't listen. He had already made up his mind. The town buzzed with gossip and suspicion. Some believed in Billy's innocence, remembering his kind heart and gentle nature. Others, swayed by Brody's influence and their own prejudices, were quick to condemn him. The atmosphere in Redemption Gulch turned ugly, poisoned by fear and mistrust. Maggie knew she had to do something. She hired a lawyer, a weary man named Mr. Peterson, who had seen better days. But Peterson warned her that Brody had stacked the deck against Billy. The evidence was circumstantial, but the sheriff's influence was strong. It was an uphill battle, and Maggie's hope began to dwindle with each passing hour. The trial was a sham. Sheriff Brody presented his flimsy evidence with a sneer, while Mr. Abernathy glared at Billy from the front row. The jury, handpicked by Brody, barely listened to Mr. Peterson's arguments. It was clear they had already made up their minds. Maggie watched in horror as the verdict was read, guilty. A gasp escaped her lips, and she felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Billy, his face pale but resolute, looked at his mother with a flicker of fear in his eyes. Before Maggie could even reach him, a mob surged forward, fueled by whiskey and prejudice. They dragged Billy out of the courtroom and towards the old oak tree at the edge of town. Brody stood by, a smirk on his face, making no attempt to stop them. Maggie fought her way through the crowd, screaming Billy's name. She saw the rope, the tree, the hate-filled faces. She clawed at the men holding her back, desperate to reach her son. "He's innocent," she cried, her voice raw with anguish. "Please, he's just a boy." But her pleas fell on deaf ears. The mob was a ravenous beast, driven by blind rage. They hoisted Billy onto a horse, the noose already around his neck. Maggie watched, paralyzed with horror, as the horse was led away. She saw Billy's terrified face, his eyes pleading for help. And then, with a sickening thud, the horse was gone. Billy's body swung lifelessly from the tree. A collective cheer erupted from the mob, a sound that would forever haunt Maggie's nightmares. The world went black. Her heart shattered into a million pieces. All that remained was a burning, unquenchable rage. The fire of a mother's love, twisted into a vow of vengeance. The days that followed were a blur of grief and anger. Maggie barely ate, barely slept. She moved through the saloon like a ghost, her eyes hollow, her face etched with pain. The townsfolk, once her friends and customers, avoided her gaze, their guilt a palpable presence in the air. But beneath the surface of her grief, a change was taking place. The gentle, kind-hearted Maggie was gone, replaced by a woman forged in the fires of vengeance. The love for her son had transformed into an unwavering resolve to make those responsible pay for their heinous crime. She spent hours staring at the old oak tree, the site of Billy's murder. She saw his face in her dreams, heard his voice in the wind. Each memory fueled her determination. She would not let his death be in vain. One morning, Maggie emerged from her grief-stricken haze. She washed her face, dressed in her usual saloon attire, but there was a new steel in her eyes, a hardness in her jaw. She walked into the saloon, her head held high, and began to clean. As she polished the bar, she thought about each person who had played a part in Billy's death. Sheriff Brody, Mr. Abernathy, the members of the lynch mob, even the townsfolk who had stood by and done nothing. They would all face her justice. Maggie knew she couldn't take them all on at once. She needed a plan, a strategy. She would be patient, methodical, and ruthless. She would use their own corruption against them, turning their secrets and lies into weapons. She vowed to dismantle the corrupt system that had allowed Billy's murder to happen. She would expose their greed, their hypocrisy, their cruelty. She would become their worst nightmare, a force of nature that would sweep through Redemption Gulch, leaving justice in its wake. The Wild West was about to meet a mother's fury. Maggie's first step was information. The Golden Nugget, once a place of laughter and camaraderie, became her strategic headquarters. She reopened its doors, not as a grieving mother, but as a keen observer. She poured drinks, wiped tables, and listened. The saloon became a confessional, a place where secrets spilled as freely as whiskey. Men, loosened by alcohol and a sense of false security, bragged about their exploits, grumbled about their rivals, and revealed their deepest fears. Maggie, with her quiet demeanor and ever-present smile, became the perfect confidant. She learned that Mr. Abernathy wasn't as wealthy as he seemed, that he was heavily in debt to a ruthless businessman from out of town. She discovered that Sheriff Brody was skimming money from the town's coffers and using it to fund his gambling habit. And she uncovered a network of corruption that ran deep within Redemption Gulch, connecting the powerful mine owners, the corrupt officials, and the unscrupulous businessmen. Maggie kept meticulous notes, recording every detail in a small, leather-bound book. She cross-referenced information, piecing together the puzzle of Redemption Gulch's dark secrets. She knew that knowledge was power, and she intended to wield it with precision. She also began to subtly shift the atmosphere of the saloon. She refused to serve anyone who had participated in the lynch mob, a silent act of defiance that sent a clear message to the town. She offered free drinks to those who had spoken out against Billy's injustice, fostering a sense of solidarity and resistance. Slowly but surely, the Golden Nugget transformed from a place of mourning into a hub of rebellion, a place where whispers of dissent began to grow into a roar of defiance. Maggie was gathering her forces, preparing to strike at the heart of Redemption Gulch's corruption. The game had begun. Her first target was Jedediah Smith, a loudmouth member of the lynch mob who fancied himself a pillar of the community. Maggie had learned that Smith was secretly cheating on his wife with a dance hall girl from a neighboring town and was deeply in debt from bad investments in a failing silver mine. Maggie anonymously sent a letter to Smith's wife, detailing his affair and providing irrefutable proof. The resulting scandal was the talk of Redemption Gulch. Smith's wife, a woman known for her fiery temper, publicly humiliated him, leaving him a social pariah. Simultaneously, Maggie leaked information about Smith's failing mine to his creditors, who immediately demanded repayment. Unable to pay, Smith was forced to sell his property at a fraction of its value, leaving him financially ruined. With his reputation shattered and his fortune gone, Jedediah Smith was a broken man. He lost his position in the community, his friends deserted him, and he became an outcast, shunned by everyone. Maggie had systematically dismantled his life, using his own secrets and weaknesses against him. It was a calculated act of revenge, a demonstration of Maggie's power and resolve. It sent a clear message to the other members of the lynch mob. No one was safe. Some townsfolk whispered that Maggie was becoming as ruthless as the men she was targeting. But others saw her as a hero, a champion of justice who was finally holding the corrupt accountable. The atmosphere in Redemption Gulch grew tense. Fear and suspicion spread like wildfire. Sheriff Brody, realizing that Maggie was a force to be reckoned with, began to watch her every move. The stage was set for a showdown. The nightmare was just beginning. Sheriff Brody, his face red with anger, stormed into the Golden Nugget. He slammed his fist on the bar, rattling the glasses and silencing the murmur of conversation. "Maggie," he growled, his eyes narrowed. "You're playing a dangerous game." Maggie calmly wiped down the bar, her gaze steady. "I'm just running my business, Sheriff. Is there a problem?" "Don't play coy with me," Brody sneered. "I know what you're up to. You think you can take down the whole town? You think you can get away with it?" "I'm not trying to take down anyone," Maggie replied, her voice soft but firm. "I'm just seeking justice for my son." "Justice?" Brody scoffed. "Billy was a thief. He got what he deserved." Maggie's eyes flashed with anger, but she quickly regained her composure. "He was innocent, and you know it. You let that mob kill him, and you did nothing to stop it." Brody leaned closer, his breath reeking of whiskey. "You better watch yourself, Maggie. You're messing with powerful people. You could end up disappearing." Maggie stood her ground, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I'm not afraid of you, Brody, or anyone else in this town. I've already lost everything. What more can you take from me?" She picked up a shot glass and stared at it intently. "You and your friends think you could get away with anything. You think you're above the law, but you're wrong. Justice will come, one way or another." Brody glared at her for a moment longer, then turned and stormed out of the saloon, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Maggie knew that she had just crossed the line. The battle had begun, and she was ready. Maggie continued her campaign, targeting the influential mine owners who had supported Sheriff Brody. She discovered that they were exploiting their workers, paying them meager wages, and forcing them to work in dangerous conditions. Using her connections with some of the more sympathetic townsfolk, Maggie helped the miners organize a strike. The mine owners, furious at the disruption to their profits, tried to intimidate the workers, but Maggie stood by their side, offering them food, shelter, and encouragement. She also leaked information about the mine owners' exploitative practices to a journalist from a big city newspaper. The resulting expose caused a public outcry, damaging their reputations and forcing them to improve working conditions and increase wages. Next, Maggie turned her attention to Mr. Abernathy, the wealthy businessman whose stolen money had triggered the events that led to Billy's death. She learned that Abernathy was involved in a shady land deal, trying to swindle poor farmers out of their property. Maggie alerted the farmers, providing them with the legal documents they needed to protect themselves. She also exposed Abernathy's scheme to the town council, who launched an investigation. Facing ruin and disgrace, Abernathy fled Redemption Gulch, leaving behind a trail of broken promises and shattered dreams. With each victory, Maggie's reputation grew. She became a symbol of hope for the oppressed, a beacon of light in the darkness of Redemption Gulch. More and more townsfolk began to support her, offering their help and their loyalty. The tide was turning. The corrupt system was beginning to crumble. But Sheriff Brody was not going to give up without a fight. He was determined to silence Maggie, once and for all. The final showdown took place on a stormy night. Sheriff Brody, desperate and cornered, gathered his remaining loyal deputies and surrounded the Golden Nugget. He intended to arrest Maggie and silence her permanently. But Maggie was ready. She had anticipated Brody's move and had rallied the townsfolk to her defense. When Brody and his men stormed the saloon, they were met with a wall of resistance. The miners, the farmers, the shopkeepers, even some of the former members of the lynch mob who had seen the error of their ways, stood shoulder to shoulder, armed with whatever they could find: rifles, shotguns, pitchforks, and even kitchen knives. A fierce gunfight erupted. The saloon was filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the deafening roar of gunfire. Maggie, armed with a rifle she had inherited from her father, fought alongside her supporters, her aim deadly and her resolve unwavering. She confronted Sheriff Brody in the middle of the chaos. They exchanged shots, each narrowly missing their target. Brody, fueled by rage and desperation, charged at Maggie, intending to kill her with his bare hands. But Maggie was too quick for him. She dodged his attack and struck him with the butt of her rifle, knocking him to the ground. As Brody lay dazed and defeated, Maggie raised her rifle, ready to deliver the final blow. But then she hesitated. She looked at Brody, lying helpless on the floor, and saw not a monster, but a broken man, consumed by greed and power. She lowered her rifle. "This isn't justice," she said, her voice trembling. "This is just revenge." She turned to the townsfolk and said, "We don't need to become like them. We need to be better." The townsfolk, inspired by Maggie's words, lowered their weapons. They arrested Brody and his deputies, bringing an end to their reign of terror. Redemption Gulch was finally free. In the aftermath of the showdown, Redemption Gulch began to heal. The townsfolk, inspired by Maggie's courage and compassion, worked together to rebuild their community on a foundation of justice and fairness. They elected a new sheriff, a fair and honest man who promised to uphold the law and protect the rights of all citizens. They established a town council that was representative of the entire community, ensuring that everyone had a voice in the decisions that affected their lives. They also created a fund to help the families of those who had been wronged by the corrupt system, providing them with the resources they needed to rebuild their lives. Maggie, though still grieving for Billy, found solace in the knowledge that his death had not been in vain. She had honored his memory by fighting for justice and creating a better world for others. She continued to run the Golden Nugget, but it was no longer just a saloon. It became a community center, a place where people could gather to share their stories, celebrate their victories, and support each other through difficult times. Maggie became a legend in the Wild West, a symbol of hope and resilience. She was known as the woman who had stood up to corruption and tyranny and had emerged victorious. Some called her a hero, others called her a vigilante. But everyone agreed that she was a force to be reckoned with. And though she was feared by the wicked, she was loved by the good. For she had shown them that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope, and that even the smallest person can make a difference. Redemption Gulch had been redeemed, thanks to the courage and determination of one extraordinary woman. Maggie had become the nightmare of the Wild West, but also its greatest hope. Years passed, and Redemption Gulch thrived. The silver mine, once a source of exploitation, became a model of fair labor practices. The farmers prospered, their land secure, and their rights protected. The Golden Nugget remained the heart of the community, a place where everyone was welcome. Maggie never forgot Billy. His memory lived on in the town he loved, in the laughter of the children playing in the streets, in the kindness and compassion that had become the defining characteristics of Redemption Gulch. She kept one of Billy's wood carvings on the bar, a small wooden bird with intricate detail. It was a reminder of his gentle spirit and his unfulfilled dreams. Sometimes, she would sit alone on the porch in the evenings, watching the stars and talking to Billy in her heart. She never remarried. Her love for Billy was too deep, too profound. But she found happiness in the community she had helped to create, in the knowledge that she had made a difference in the world. Children would come to her, asking her to tell them stories of the Wild West, of the gunfights and the outlaws, of the struggles and the triumphs. And Maggie would tell them the truth, the good and the bad, the light and the dark. She taught them about justice and fairness, about courage and compassion, about the importance of standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult. She taught them that even the smallest person can change the world. And as she grew old, surrounded by the love and respect of the community she had saved, Maggie knew that she had fulfilled her vow. She had brought justice to Redemption Gulch, and in doing so, she had redeemed herself. The nightmare of the Wild West had become its greatest hope, a testament to the power of a mother's love and the enduring spirit of the human heart.